would have been really funny. I wanted to, for Jack's one, like disappear into the green screen.
I was saying he'd wear a morph suit and I'd wear my gimp suit. He'd ask me a question, I unzip the mouth. Well, actually,
oh man, a gimp suit would have been so funny for Luke's. Oh my god. Alright.
Fuck, like who's that chef that, there's like this chef that does this thing trying to cook like different meals. And then like one time just out of the blue he rocked up in like a full gimp suit. And he's like this big bloke and they're like deep frying fucking like donuts. And he's like doing this and he's like, ah shit! He's like getting like grease on him.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah. Well, welcome to Talking Dark Live, my stupid little show that we have been doing to kind of highlight artists in the show, but you know, my projects have been about highlighting friends that I treat like family. You know, we didn't grow up with a lot of family. I know you're close to Dan, I'm close to Joel, but aside from that, we don't have much. So I've always thought of my friends as family, and you know, you're my little bro, you're family, but I do think of you as one of my best little mates. So thanks for joining me.
Made the cut. How good. Worried for a bit there on the last day, you know, like am I, you know, is it just best for last, or is your boy getting, you know, is your boy getting cropped out?
I wanted people on the last 2 days that I could really just chill and not have to worry too much about, you know, getting things right. But, you know, at the same time I was doing this bachelor degree, you were up at COFA with Gina doing ceramics and jewellery, and I haven't been able to put my finger on why I really value your practice and, you know, consider it more seriously than other people around us might. And you actually touched on it the other day when you said you said people might think I'm into funny things, but I'm actually interested in the culture around these things.
Yeah.
Could you talk a bit about that to me and what you mean by that?
Well, yeah, like I guess one thing, like a lot of my art has focused around kind of like smoking culture and like the explicit and the pornographic, and I think part of that is like I think it pulls out like a really interesting part of society, like going all through history it's always kind of been outcast, no matter how large or small a kind of part of the population has kind of done it.
Did that
and then
just turn off?
Heard the shutter.
Like the screen's gone black.
Okay, that means I'm gonna.
Brian, if you don't want to lend me the ciggies, that's fine. I've got other people I can ask. You were the closest. I figured.
No, I'm not fucking giving you any cigarettes.
But not shit myself. I think that would be the worst outcome. Oh, but then it's visual, you know, then you can...
A little just down the leg.
Yeah.
Right.
Right, 16 down.
Yeah, every time.
Oh. Alright, technical crisis averted.
Yeah.
We managed to sort it out. What were we talking about? Oh yeah, so the culture that surrounds
funny shit.
Yeah, funny shit. You know, the kind of human shit that surrounds certain subcultures.
Yeah. Like, I think it just really, like, exemplifies sort of, like, and humanises, like, the sort of smaller ends of communities and, like, where people come from. Like, I think a really early example that I looked at that kind of brought this through was, like, Edmund Munch's The Self-Portrait with Cigarette. And the whole idea that he uses the cigarette as, like, a representation of his identity because it was just rolling up like found cigarette butts into newspaper and smoking it, and that being like became like the identity of that group of artists, that they were just like poor as shit going to those saloons, like, you know, doing their art.
And that smoked rolled cigarettes, I always loved that portrait when I found out it was a symbol of the working class.
Yeah.
Like, wasn't that painting really controversial at the time?
Yeah, at the time people were just kind of like, you know, like at the time people were like, oh, he's lost the plot. Even though like these days we kind of look back and we're like, no, there was a long way to go, you know, like we're only kind of looking into the rabbit hole. We weren't there yet, you know. But yeah, like, and I think sort of going through time and through all different eras, like it's kind of really brought through like different cultures, and like even the humour behind it, like the way that people try and kind of like find humour in life in kind of what is a very sort of real part for them. Like I think almost part of the ironic humour in smoking is like the sociality of it, the fun that people have through it, and the representations of it, and then ultimately it's like they're just highly cancerous, and and like even all the sort of known health risks aside, they still hold such a strong place in society, even though, like, you know, don't have to look far back before it was like the Winfield Cup, you know, Rothmans racing, like, you know, that was really entrenched in society before, but even still sort of being pushed away, it still sort of lives so prominently, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny to think that only 30 years ago professional sportsmen were all pack-a-day smokers.
Yeah. That's what kept them going, you know.
Yeah. Well, you've kind of touched on it a bit already, because you know, with smoking culture, it's your ceramics that are on show upstairs, and with your jewellery, you have those masks and things you made.
Yeah.
How long do you think smoking culture will last? Do you think it will persist? Or, because it's interesting, this kind of removal of aesthetics the government's done now, and do you wonder how long that will still pervade it? And like those ceramic works, I mean, my favourite one, the big tobacco is a tax bit for old fat white cunts.
Yeah.
It kind of spells that out really nicely, that, like, you know, why are we still doing this? Why are we still smoking? It's a big pharmaceutical company, effectively.
Yeah, well, I think it's like, I don't think it'll stop anytime soon, both like the nature of addictions, and then also kind of like from the government perspective, the money's got to come from somewhere. Like they're getting, you know, mad stacks from people smoking. Like I don't think they really actually want people to stop, particularly like besides the sort of health advice side of it. I think realistically they're probably still pretty happy getting their, you know, millions on millions from smoking.
Yeah, they just show an intent to stop.
Yeah, exactly. Call Quitline if you want, but like
the hospitals. So I did forget to do Welcome to Country, but I mean, you've been giving me some great books about kind of Indigenous activism and Indigenous academia, and I was curious as to what your connection to Indigenous Studies was. I actually did wonder for a while whether I'd said something really fucked up, and you and Gina were like, "Fuck, we need to educate him." But I would be, you know, I'd be kind of surprised if that was something I was shitty about. But what do Indigenous Studies sort of mean to you?
I think it really came from like when I started with a course, Post-Pornographic Studies, and the like looking through that, it's sort of looking at how, through the lens of pornography, the way that it really kind of pioneers a lot of society, a lot of technological developments, yet it's still really outcast. And at least like money-wise, it's, you know, one of the largest industries internationally. Like it's, you know, it's really booming. And then even through COVID, it's exploded. And then, but really, it's not something that anyone ever talks about. And you can really see like a very transparent, like economic patterns going on through the porn industry. And what I thought was really interesting was my lecturer at the time. I can't think of his name, but he was, you know, writing a book called The Colonial Cum Shot. It's pretty brilliant. But he's comparing like the way that even through colonization and media, the Indigenous people were still being taken advantage of. And in a very early sense, like in the 70s, like Australian exotic porn was a huge industry. People were like filming these pornos on the beaches around kangaroos, you know, heading out to Uluru and filming all these scenes, and it was just crazy because at the time it was just, you know, making big international dollars. Like there was a famous one that kind of shifted it because this lady almost got attacked by a croc because they were like up in far north Queensland filming a porno, and a croc came out of the water. And it's just funny that something so obscene had to happen before they turned around and were like, oh, maybe we shouldn't be doing this. But the you know, the government's kind of jerk reaction to that was like some really harsh controls around porn in Australia. And a lot of the laws are really, like that's why a lot of porn isn't actually filmed in Australia anymore, is though inherently good laws, like it means that porns need to show acts of consent in the porn. It needs to be clear that they are all of age. If it's ever in question throughout the film, then a disclaimer should be put at the beginning to clarify that everyone is of age. So really, so generally really good things like that took place, but then also it is not legal to film and use Australia as sort of like exotic place in pornos and set them
as like a backdrop.
Yeah, as a backdrop. So you couldn't, you know, you can't put Sydney Harbour Bridge behind them while they're going at it and sort of be like, wow, look at that, it's crazy. But then that sort of took place and it almost started to protect these Indigenous people that they were sort of manipulating in these pornos, and then it's kind of come back around the other way in that throughout the Indigenous intervention, a lot of these laws sort of came back around to bite them where, for example, the government decided that Indigenous people struggle to differentiate the difference between like perception and media and reality, and for that reason they shouldn't be able to watch porn because that will increase domestic violence cases. And there was no particular studies to back this up or anything. It was kind of purely, just kind of like some
like
you know,
Scotty.
some people around a table saying, "No, this is a good idea."
Yeah, it sounds like Scotty spitballing the human mind.
And but realistically, what it turned into was like, you know, a lot of like Indigenous people being prosecuted for things that either are laws that aren't being enforced on the population, or are being sort of tailored to kind of suit an agenda of saving the children, which was a big part of the Indigenous intervention, was saving these children because they didn't feel the Indigenous communities were safe for these children to be raised in. And so I think it's funny that, you know, you could have seen that going on, what was that, early O's going on, you could have looked at that and thought, oh, okay, there's some really drastic action taking place in these Indigenous communities, and sort of taken now to where there's a lot larger, you know, gentrification going on, moving these people around, that people are kind of like, oh, okay, like what's going on? You're really changing like the culture of place. But really it's like only that change of culture of place is happening in, you know, Waterloo, but when it was happening like out at Uluru with these pornos, no one gave a toss, and that was the 70s.
Yeah, I mean it's horrible too how like the collateral, like children are always getting thrown under the bus so that draconian laws can get passed. Like that's what they're doing at the moment actually, that it's they're passing it as like an anti-bullying thing, and it's really just anti-discrimination law saying you can't criticise government.
Yeah, well it's like I can't even think who the politician was, but the guy that got on Twitter and all it was just tagging the politician saying you are a racist, and he was hit with a defamation case.
Yeah.
Like instantly, and it's kind of like,
Crazy
mate,
shit like that.
you know, like he's putting out an apology so that he's not getting, you know, 30k taken off him. It's like, far out, man, you know.
It was pretty crazy. And that Clyde, Batty.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Mate,
yeah, it's crazy with it.
You know, when that Titanic 2 comes out, your boy will be on board. You know, that's what I'm holding out for. You know. You know, he's a bit of an oddball, but if he brings us that Titanic 2, we're chilling. You know, he's a homie. He brings me that shit for a homie.
You do like the fringe politician in the service of the good laugh.
Yeah. Just got to keep it interesting, don't you? You know.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that post-pornography study because, I mean, it sounds fascinating, but also quite terrifying, right? Like. What are some of the ways that our minds are being conditioned by porn? Because Lindley actually touched on it a bit, but not from watching porn. Well, actually, sort of in making her work, but also just from her experience in the sex work industry.
I think like some of the largest kind of areas of that.
Hang on, we're going to have to take a quick break. That's just turned off. Oh yeah.
I mean, you know, people are entitled to their sexual proclivities, you know. I mean, let there be 1,000 blossoms bloom as far as I'm concerned, you know. But I ain't spending any time on it because in the meantime, every 3 months, a person is torn to pieces by a crocodile in North Queensland.
To license it.
Who said that? Oh no, it's not recording. Oh, that's a shame.
You're just like under your breath, just like roasting me in the background, just like, you too small.
I was thinking that when we walk around, like part of me is just too mean. Like I feel like I just make too many mean jokes about people like walking around the space and like, oh, this is my mate's sister. I'm like, oh, did you tell them it was shit or something? Like, it's perfectly nice, but I'm like, man, why do I just want to keep throwing mud?
I've had here where I've said something about someone's work and behind you. It's like the worst feeling.
Take him out.
Yeah. Turn this thing on. Nice. What were we talking about? Post-Pornographic Studies. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think one of like the greatest kind of, I suppose, like the facades of porn are both like two, I think, really interesting ideas of it are like the idea of free labour and things that people feel that they're entitled to. And I think that's like huge when it talks particularly with women and their bodies, like it's whether it's sort of domestic or in the adult industry, like there's often like an expectation of like free labour and like sort of undervalued work, like it's not yet appreciated though it's being consumed and taken advantage of. They don't sort of acknowledge the work and what goes into making it, like people would watch, whatever's free or going, they don't sort of understand like the production or the toll or the time that goes into doing that. It just becomes like an expectation for the woman in that field. And then kind of pushing that even further back, talking domestic labour and the expectations of women in the household, whether they be stay at home or working, kind of the domestic labour always fell back onto them.
Yeah, well, I think even like back at those old times too, like it's very easy to be like, okay, post-war Australia and before that, like woman in the house, but it's like no, sex work is one of the oldest histories of working culture. Yeah,
and I think like analytically looking back at it, it would often be trying to support a household where it's like if the husband wasn't bringing in enough money or was facing unemployment or something, it's something that was entry level, accessible,
and then wars and stuff too.
And then I think like the second thing is kind of like the beliefs of amateurization and like the idea that that's like the amateur, the raw, like the relatable is what's kind of like desired or wanted by people, and like a lot of work then goes into making things appear or look amateur, which is kind of like this funny disparity, but I think that's like a really interesting idea, is like the facade of it all, like sort of being like, trying to make it look real for people, trying to,
Yeah. I mean, that pervades aesthetics and art making too. I mean, like, so many people here, myself included, we spend so much time trying to make art feel less like art and more like real life.
Yeah, well, you've done your best, but it's all right, mate. Like, get them next time.
Yeah. I mean, like it looks like life, but not my life. You've seen my house. It's nowhere near as neat as this. Yeah. Cool. So, anything else we need to talk about? I mean, what are your future plans with making? Because I will keep you in mind if I do hunt down a studio space, because I want you to keep making the ceramics and the jewellery. But yeah,
I think it's tricky. Like I think I've sort of like fallen into that pattern. Like like I'm working in childcare. I enjoy that. Like,
tell me a bit about that too, because I think that's interesting.
Well, yeah, I've been doing childcare. I've almost finished my diploma in early age education, and it's kind of like one of those things. Like I think it's a good industry. It's treated me well. Like I've been there for a bit, and I think it's interesting. Like the diploma that I'm doing now can sort of translate both into primary school teaching, could also go into youth work and like council services and youth services, which could be interesting. Like it's sort of like just writing that out, it still kind of gives me time to do my own thing. So
yeah, and I mean, like, because part of this show too has been talking to people about how, as I try and extend myself into the community a bit, was how they themselves try and contribute to the community. And I'm curious, like, what itch does it scratch, working in the after school care and managing more responsibilities over time?
I think like I'm just generally like a pretty social person. Like I think that's kind of like a big part of my thing. I just like, chatting shit, being around people, and I'm kind of you know, that fills that half of it, and then what I do in my own time, I can just kind of, you know, mosey along.
Yeah, nice. Nice. Well, yeah, any last thoughts before we wrap up?
Don't think so.
Cool. Thanks
Yeah.
for being here, bro.
Yeah, no worries.
Easy.
Great.
Done.